I still remember the night it happened. Not because it was loud or violent, but because it was so quiet. The kind of quiet that screams. I was 17, senior year. It was supposed to be a new beginning for me. I had just gotten accepted into a small liberal arts college on a scholarship. For once, I felt like I had something that was mine. A reason to hold my head up. My family? Complicated. That's the nicest word I can use. My parents had always played favorites, and I was never the chosen one. That title belonged to my younger sister, Elise. The golden girl, the pageant queen. The girl with the sparkling laugh and perfect posture, and parents who acted like she breathed stardust. Me? I was the quiet one. The reader. The planner. The one who held things together behind the curtain while Elise took the stage. I didn't mind, not really, until I started noticing that every time I shined, even just a little, someone came along to dim the lights. That night, I had just come back from a poetry reading. I'd been invited to share a piece I wrote about reclaiming your own voice. The crowd clapped. People approached me after and asked if they could find my writing online. I felt seen. I came home late. Elise was waiting in the kitchen, still in her homecoming dress. Our parents were asleep. "You think you're something now, huh?" she said. I blinked. "What are you talking about?" She laughed, but it wasn't a kind laugh. "You couldn't just let me have one night? One night where you weren't trying to be better." I went to bed confused, hurt, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. I woke up hours later with a strange burning in my throat and a cotton-dry mouth. My voice was gone. Not hoarse, not sick. Gone. At first, I thought it was stress or a bad cold, but then I saw the empty pill bottle on my desk. My anxiety meds, the ones I kept locked in my drawer. And a note, written in Elise's handwriting. "Now no one has to hear you anymore." In the days that followed, I lived in silence, literal silence. Doctors ran tests. Laryngitis, they said. Vocal cord strain. Maybe even psychosomatic. They gave me lozenges, steroids, but nothing worked. I couldn't speak above a whisper. And inside, I knew why. I knew Elise had done something. She always did when she felt threatened. But how do you explain to people that your sister might have drugged you, stolen your voice, on purpose? My parents barely noticed. They blamed it on stress, said I was too dramatic. "You're always sensitive, Clara," my mom said. "Just let Elise have her moment. Let her have her moment." It echoed in my head like a chant. But this wasn't just a moment. It was my voice, my sense of self. And I felt like a ghost in my own home, seen, but not heard. At school, it was worse. I tried to write things down to communicate, but people grew impatient. Teachers skipped over me in class. Friends stopped asking me to hang out. Elise, meanwhile, thrived. She won prom court, got accepted into a state university. My parents threw her a surprise party. I stayed in my room. I didn't write. I didn't read. I stared at the ceiling at night, trying to remember the sound of my own laugh. I wondered if I disappeared, would they even notice? One night, I found myself in front of the bathroom mirror, my phone flashlight illuminating the space where my reflection should have felt familiar. I mouthed the words, "This is not who I am." And that's when something inside me cracked, but not the kind of crack that breaks. It was the kind that lets light in. I didn't find strength all at once. It came in slivers, like light slipping through blinds in the early morning. Quiet, but persistent. It started with a journal. Becca, a girl in my creative writing class, noticed my absence. One afternoon, she slid a small leather notebook into my locker with a note tucked inside. "When you're ready to write again, I want to read it. B." I cried in the bathroom stall for 20 minutes after that. Not because of the notebook itself, but because someone had seen me, someone noticed I was gone. That night, I opened the notebook and stared at the blank page. My hand trembled as I held the pen, but I started writing. Not about what happened, not yet. Instead, I wrote about a girl who lost her voice, but not her fire. A girl who people tried to erase, but she became the ink. Every night, I wrote more. I created a version of myself that didn't cower. She had sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. Her name was Lark, and in that story, Lark didn't need to scream to be heard. She spoke through paper, through signs, through action. People listened. And then I realized something. So could I. I started slipping anonymous notes under classroom doors, on bathroom mirrors, into library books. Words like, "You're more than their expectations." Just because they're louder doesn't mean they're right. A whisper can still be a revolution. I watched from afar as people read them. Some laughed, some smiled, some teared up. I didn't need to speak. My words were traveling without me, and they were touching people. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel invisible. Becca approached me a few days later in the hallway, holding one of the notes. "Was this you?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I just looked at her, held her gaze. She smiled. "It's beautiful. You're still in there, Clara." And somehow, I believed her. Graduation was 3 weeks away. Elise was already planning her farewell speech. She'd been chosen as class representative, of course. My parents were over the moon. "Finally, both our girls graduating the same year," they beamed at dinner. I sat there nodding in silence, but inside a storm was building. Becca and I had started spending afternoons together in the library. She helped me polish my short stories and submit one anonymously to a local teen writing contest. It was a piece about a girl whose family clipped her wings every time she tried to fly, titled Feathers of Silence. It won first place. The judges called it a raw, poetic triumph of self-worth, but I didn't tell my parents. I didn't even tell Elise. Because I was saving something bigger, something final. The school had invited alumni and families to the graduation banquet, a tradition filled with glowing toasts, photo slideshows, and pre-approved speeches from hand-picked students. Becca leaned in one day and whispered, "What if you took that stage?" I shook my head. "They won't let me. Elise was already chosen." She smirked. "You don't ask, you take it." So I began to plan. I wrote a letter, not just to Elise, to my parents, to everyone who ever silenced me. I didn't write it as Clara the student or Clara the sister. I wrote it as Clara the survivor, Clara the storyteller. I practiced reading it aloud with Becca. My voice, still shaky, had begun to return in short bursts. Some days I could manage full sentences. Some days I whispered, but I didn't care. I was going to speak that night, not through rage, but through truth. The banquet hall was bathed in gold, fairy lights dangling from the ceiling, polished tables set with linen and silver, proud parents sipping wine like their dreams were finally fulfilled. Elise stood at the podium, radiant in her white dress, with our parents beaming in the front row. She began her speech, all charm and practiced poise, quoting Maya Angelou like it was her truth. But I knew better. Becca gave me a nod from the side of the stage, and I stood up. At first, no one noticed. The music still played. People still clinked forks against dessert plates. But then the mic squealed, not from feedback, but from surprise. Because I was standing at the spare podium, not scheduled, not invited. "Clara," Elise hissed. I opened the folded letter in my hand and steadied my breath. I could feel the room shift, whispers, stares, but I spoke. Not with anger, not with apology, with power. "My name is Clara Dawson. You might know me as Elise's sister, the quiet one. Some of you have called me shy, others forgettable. But tonight I want to tell you who I really am. I'm the girl who was drugged in her own home because someone feared she might shine too brightly. I'm the girl who lost her voice, not to illness but to jealousy, to fear, to a silence inflicted, not chosen. I'm the girl whose parents told her to let her sister have her moment, not knowing they were stealing her years. But I'm also the girl who found her voice again, in ink, in whispers, in the quiet power of not giving up." The room was silent. My parents' faces paled. Elise stared as if I'd grown wings. I continued, my voice trembling but clear. "You taught me shame. You taught me silence. But I learned something else, something you never expected, that even clipped wings regrow. Tonight, I'm not here to ruin a moment. I'm here to reclaim my own. And to tell every quiet girl in this room, you are not a shadow." I stepped back. Becca stood and clapped. Then another student. Then a teacher. Then the whole room. Elise was still frozen at the other podium, her hands clenched around her speech, one that would never be remembered. "But mine," mine echoed. The night of the banquet, something changed. Not just in the people around me, but inside me. I didn't walk out of that hall alone. Becca looped her arm through mine. A few teachers stopped me, one even teary-eyed, saying, "You were the voice we didn't know we needed to hear." A younger student shyly asked if I had more of my writing online. I didn't cry. Not then. But when I got home and sat at my desk, the old one I used to write letters on as a child, I saw the framed photo of Elise and me, dressed as princesses, age 6 and 4, before the comparison started, before the dividing line was drawn. I looked at that photo, and I wept. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I had mourned someone who hadn't died, me. And that night, I stopped mourning. Instead, I started becoming. I opened a blog under the name Feathers of Silence. I posted everything: my essays, my poetry, my story from the banquet. I didn't hide behind metaphors anymore. I signed each post, Clara Dawson. It gained traction. Comments poured in from other girls, women, even men. People who had lived in silence for too long, finally finding the courage to speak. One wrote, "I left my toxic home today. I read your story out loud to myself before I packed. Thank you." Another said, "My sister always outshone me. I never knew how to express what that felt like until I read your words." Each message reminded me that my voice, once taken, had become a chorus. And then came the email. A nonprofit in New York called Unmuted Voices had read my blog. They wanted me to speak at their youth summit. Not read, not post, speak. I panicked. My voice still wavered sometimes. There were days it still cracked or disappeared when I was nervous. But Becca said, "Clara, your words don't need to be perfect. They just need to be yours." So I said yes. And that decision marked the beginning of everything that followed. The auditorium was packed. Rows of young faces, cameras set up near the stage, volunteers buzzing in the aisles. I stood backstage, holding the small index card with my opening line scribbled in pen. My palms were sweating. But I wasn't afraid. Not this time. Becca was in the front row. She gave me that tiny smile, the one that had always meant, "You've got this." And for the first time in my life, I believed her without hesitation. They called my name. As I stepped onto the stage, I felt the weight of every silence I'd endured, every whisper I was never allowed to speak, every moment I had swallowed words to make space for someone else. But now, this was my space. I stepped up to the microphone, took a deep breath, and began. I was once the girl no one listened to, and then the girl who physically couldn't speak. I used to think silence meant weakness, that losing your voice meant losing your power. But I learned that silence can also be a crucible, a place where something stronger is formed. I found my voice in the cracks, in poetry, in ink, in pain. And when I finally let it out, I didn't whisper. I didn't ask for permission. I spoke as someone who had been unheard and survived it. And now, I speak not just for myself, but for every girl who was told to let her sister shine. For every child called dramatic, sensitive, or too much, and for every person who thinks their story isn't worth telling. I paused. The auditorium was completely still. And then I said without the card, "The truth is they never took my voice. They only delayed its arrival. And now that it's here, I will never be quiet again." The standing ovation wasn't the best part. The best part was what happened after. People came up, crying, hugging, telling their own stories. I was invited to publish Feathers of Silence as a collection. I got a scholarship to pursue writing full-time. Becca and I co-founded a workshop series for students called Unshushed. Years later, when I was asked to deliver a keynote at a national conference, I stood in a larger hall, looked out at a sea of faces, and thought back to that girl staring into the bathroom mirror, mouthing, "This is not who I am." She was right. I am not her anymore. I am Clara Dawson. I am the voice I waited for, and I'm not going anywhere.